Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, Rishi Sunak confirms he is going to COP27, reversing an earlier decision to stay away. We'll be taking a look at what lies ahead for the Prime Minister at the climate conference in Egypt and who will be attending and who won't. Also ahead, lead by example. A new report finds the government is failing on its own pledge to reach net zero by 2050 and
it's up to us to find a solution.
Protecting our planet for the future. Research by Sky Kids reveals half of all children are frightened when they hear news about climate change. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes happening to our world and interrogate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. But we start the show today with a U-turn by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who has confirmed he will be attending the COP27 summit in Egypt. Well, Mr Sunak initially said he wasn't going to head to the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh due to other pressing domestic commitments. And this is what he tweeted earlier today. There is no long-term prosperity without action on climate change, and there is no energy security without investing in renewables. And this is why I will attend COP27 next week to deliver on Glasgow's legacy of building a secure and sustainable future. Well, the decision came less than 24 hours after Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, confirmed to Sky News in an exclusive interview that he will be attending the summit.
Are you going to go to COP27?
Well, yes, as it happens, but that's not relevant to Ukraine.
And final question, I mean, do you still harbour hopes of return?
I was invited by the Egyptians. So I'm very happy to go.
So you go.
Yeah.
And you presumably think the Prime Minister should go?
No, I think the Prime Minister's doing, as he's pointed out, he's got a massive amount to do. We've got to sort out a huge agenda. That's what he's getting on with. I happen to have a particular interest. I was at the Glasgow COP. Although it's become unfashionable to talk about it, was a fantastic global success. We did a huge amount of good for the planet. I want to talk a little bit about how I see things and how we see things in the UK.
Well, let's talk to our climate change and energy correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter. Thanks for joining us. What do you think this says about Sunak's commitment to the climate crisis then, Hannah?
Well, it gives the appearance of a leader who was happy to let climate change slip down the agenda a little bit, but then changed his mind when it became politically painful. I think his supporters, of course, would say that that's a very uncharitable assessment and that Mr Sunak is deeply committed to net zero, committed in particular to accelerating investment in cheap, clean power sources like offshore wind, and committed to the opportunity that a green economy would bring. But make no mistake about it, you know, Rishi Sunak even thinking about not turning up to COP27 when the UK was the host of COP26, as Boris Johnson was just saying there, to great fanfare. That has put a real dent in the UK's reputation as a global climate leader.
And Hannah, what else is going on at COP? In particular, what do you think Mr Sunak will face when he does arrive there?
Well, there's an eye-wateringly long list of problems to tackle. Mr Sunak will join America's Joe Biden, France's Emmanuel Macron, Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and others as they look really at one overarching problem, which is strengthening the resolve of the international community to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming within reach, if possible, as various issues like war, political instability, inflation and energy crisis threaten to pull the planet even further off track than it already is. And the other thing that's threatening to overshadow the entire summit is this growing row over payments, compensation from rich nations who became wealthy as a result of burning fossil fuels, finding the cash to pay poorer nations for the damage already inflicted as a result of climate change. It's a perennial problem at COPs, this disparity between rich nations and poor nations. But as climate disasters unfold across the planet, as we see Pakistan underwater, we see heat waves in Europe and wildfires in California, these issues are being thrown into sharp relief, and there is anger and frustration that more isn't being done by the wealthiest nations on the planet.
OK, Hannah, thank you very much for that update. Well, let's take a close look for you at what we can expect, because COP sees world leaders, isn't it, come together to discuss and agree how to jointly address climate change and its impacts. Now, the fortnight of negotiations kick off with a World Leaders Summit on the 7th and 8th of November, where high-level talks between heads of state will take place. And after this, officials will tackle some of the biggest issues surrounding the climate each day. On the 9th of November, for example, Finance Day, we'll see delegates discuss how to use economies to fund climate solutions around the world. Well, the 10th of November is scheduled to be both Science Day and Youth and Future Generations Day. Representatives will discuss how technology and younger people could make a difference. And towards the end, Solutions Day, government officials, business representatives and innovators will come together and share their ideas on how to tackle the climate crisis. Over 90 heads of state have confirmed their attendance next week, including US President Joe Biden, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and French President Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin are not expected to attend. Also missing out on the event will be King Charles III, despite his long-held concerns about climate. Well, companies have long been encouraged to set net zero targets in the UK, but a new report has found the government itself is failing to lead by example on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. There's a legal binding target, isn't there, to reach net zero by 2050, and the report by the Public Accounts Committee describe a poor quality of emissions, meaning measuring and reporting across central government. So how are others supposed to, well, clean up their act? Well, joining me now is Sarah Olney, a lead member of this report by the Public Accounts Committee. Hello, Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us. What are your thoughts overall on this report? It's not glowing.
No, that's right. I mean, what we found in our inquiry was that there's quite a lot of confusion about what the targets are, how they're set, how data should be collected, how it's reported. And what we also found was a real failing to follow up, where departments were failing to meet those targets. There was really no enforcement, there was no comeback, there was no plan to help them, no resources allocated. So what we found was a real mishmash across central government when it came to setting and achieving targets for greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And that's really adding up to quite a lot of, we think, missed opportunities to really make a difference.
So what do you think needs to happen next? Because the government, they've made this legally binding commitment to reach net zero by 2050. And based on this report, do you think that's achievable?
We still think it's achievable, but what really needs to happen is a real focus on what's going to be required to get there. We need a plan, we need a strategy, and we need certainly across central government when it comes to combating greenhouse gas emissions. There needs to be a much more joined up, sort of centralised way of setting targets for each department, measuring, and above all, using the data that's collected to drive decision making, to share best practice, and really to make better decisions about how to allocate resources in order to help those departments that are not meeting their targets.
OK, Sarah Olney, a big job ahead there. That's a lead member of the report from the Public Accounts Committee. Thanks for joining us. Now, in other climate news, temperatures in Europe have been increased more than twice the global average over the past 30 years. Now, the highest of any continent in the world, actually. A new European Union State of Climate report said Europe presents a live picture of a warming world, and it warns that should warming continue, heat waves, wildfires, floods and other climate change impacts will affect society. A new poll suggests the majority of people think the government is doing too little on climate change. The survey for aid agency Carford ahead of COP27 also found that almost half of those quizzed didn't think the government was committed to its climate goals. And the government has a legal target, as we were saying there, to cut emissions to net zero overall by 2050. And they hosted last year's COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Now, new research shows rhino horns have steadily shrunk over the last 100 years, and scientists believe it may be due to hunting. Long-horned rhinos have been poached for years, and scientists believe those with smaller horns are more likely to survive and then pass their genes down to future generations. The rhino remains an endangered species. Now, a survey by Sky Kids has revealed that half of children are frightened by climate change, with the majority wanting schools to teach more on the subject. A brand new study asked 2,000 children aged between 7 and 14 about their views on climate change. Well, it revealed that nearly half of children claim that climate change is the biggest issue facing the planet right now. And only 10% of children think the government is doing enough to tackle climate change. But it's not all negative, as 63% of children think it's not too late to save the planet. Well, our special programme for young people, FYI, will be looking at all of this in detail, as well as a special film here on Sky News this weekend, COP27, 6 Ways to Save Our Planet.
We're all so lucky that this is our home.
A place where creatures are free to roam.
But the climate is changing because of pollution. And it's up to us to find a solution.
United as one, our ideas to share.
And you can help too, because we all care. Do not let our planet die!
Well, I'm pleased to welcome FYI presenter Braden Bent into the studio. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We see there from the figures that lots of children are suffering from climate anxiety. Tell us a little bit about what you found in particular.
Yeah, so FYI's major survey questioned 2,007 to 14-year-olds across the UK. And our findings were really interesting, actually, because as you mentioned there, 43% of us think that climate change is the biggest issue facing our planet right now. But there is a bit of positive news in there, because 63% of us said that it's not too late to save the planet. Now, 81% of us also want to be taught more about the climate crisis in school. And I think that shows that we're keen, we want to learn more, and also we've got our own ideas about, you know, what can be done.
I know, and that leads me on to my second question, actually, because there will be lots of young children watching this, perhaps know you and follow you, and they'll be wondering, you know, what can I do to make a difference? And also ease away a bit of that anxiety too.
Yeah, so as well as FYI's survey, there's a new Sky Kids Sky News documentary coming out this weekend called COP27, 6 Ways to Save Our Planet. And that's a brilliant watch because there's loads of tips on what we can all do to help. And also, you know, there's loads of really inspiring stories in there. And I think that's really important because anybody can watch it and gather stuff from it. And also, our survey found out that 89% of us are trying to recycle and go cleaner with our rubbish. 82% of us are turning off the lights to save electricity. 62% of us cycle or walk to school, and 27% of us are eating less meat than we used to. And that just shows that although we're limited to what we can do, we are trying our best.
Yeah, and there's the small things that you can do in your everyday life that can make a difference. Braden, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
joining us.